So the Phoenix Suns season is over. I took a couple of days on this one because after probably the worst Game 7 loss ever, I didn't want to immediately put a video out and be a little bit too reactionary to what we saw and just immediately go to like blow it up, change all these things with this roster, because there's a lot of nuance to this. There's so many different things to consider from a monetary standpoint, from a roster standpoint, in terms of what we just saw from a team that literally made the finals last year and the circumstances of these two seasons for Phoenix. There's a lot of details to go through here. And ultimately, I think this is going to be a very interesting offseason in Phoenix. Now, first, I do feel like we need to recap the season just a little bit for Phoenix. They had an incredible season. Winning 60 plus games is not easy. And it's not like this is just a team that had a ton of regular season success this year. They were good last year. They made the finals last year, granted, in a situation where, yes, some teams were hurt, whether it be in the West that they played or teams that they didn't play. The competition was not quite there for Phoenix, but I still thought they were really good. You don't get to the finals and have a 2-0 lead in the finals by accident. And so to then go from that to having a great regular season, even dealing with some injury issues to Chris Paul, to struggling in the first round to deal with a Pelicans team that suddenly looked very frisky, and then to lose a 7-game series to a Dallas team that, even with the result of Game 7, I don't feel like that Dallas team is better than Phoenix, but they did show a lot of their flaws, especially as you get to the postseason, which are Chris Paul wearing down, the over-reliance on someone like Devin Booker to create a ton of stuff for you. And if Chris Paul is compromised in the postseason, as he has been for a lot of his career, Devin Booker's not the kind of guy that's just going to be able, like, he's not Giannis, he's not Luka, like, he can't do it literally all by himself. And if Chris Paul is compromised, suddenly the foundation and the core of this team in the postseason starts to crumble and it starts to fall apart, which brings up the question of, like, what do you do to fix it? Like, how do you remedy that problem? Because it's not a one-off thing. Like, if you continue to run this roster back the exact same next year, it's a very real possibility that once again Chris Paul, drops off in the playoffs, starts to wear down. It makes sense. He's a small guard in his late 30s. Like, that's not like a random thing that happened. It's going to make complete and total sense. And so if you want to continue to try and be a contender, that's something that you're going to have to deal with. And it's not the only question mark for this group. You also have to figure out the DeAndre Ayton part of this, and the fact that Cam Johnson is going to need an extension, and the fact that if you combine those 5 guys' salaries between Bridges, Ayton, Booker, Paul, and Cam Johnson, you're looking at easily a luxury tax team for typically like one of, if not the cheapest owners in the entire league. So that's the overview. Now we got to get into the details. So first and foremost, I do think that it's important as we start to get a little bit further removed from this Phoenix situation over the next couple of months to not overreact. Think about where Phoenix was prior to the Chris Paul trade. Think about winning, 25 games a year for the first 4 seasons of Devin Booker's career, and the fact that they were nothing. And the most exciting thing that had happened to them in the entirety of Devin Booker's career was that run they went on in the bubble, and that was still a below 500 team from a record standpoint. To go from that to making the finals last year, having the best record in the league this year, a ton of advanced numbers that said that they were incredible, especially in closing moments, and you lost in a Game 7. That stinks. You had the worst game probably in franchise history in a big moment in Game 7 of a second round series to a Mavs team that really gained confidence over the course of that series. It's really important to make sure that you're not changing the entire structure, the entire foundation of your roster, a roster that made the finals, a roster that won 60 plus games strictly because of 48 minutes of basketball. However, it's also important to recognize the flaws you have within this roster and the fact that they need to be fixed and attempt to fix them. For me, the problem begins with a lack of perimeter creation in the postseason if Chris Paul is not Chris Paul anymore, is not going to be peak level Chris Paul in the postseason, which I think is a repeatable thing. And you have 2 options there. One, you can look to try and trade him after just signing him to an extension last offseason. That feels unrealistic. Or get more playmakers on your roster, because when everything is running well, this Phoenix team has a very clear blueprint. Plan A is awesome. Chris Paul, Devin Booker on the floor together, a couple of long-rangey wings, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Cam Johnson, guys that can shoot, guys that can defend, and then DeAndre in the middle with some depth behind all those guys. When everything is working, Plan A is awesome. The problem is Plan B, C, and D all stink, because if one of those guys is not performing well, Chris Paul in the playoffs, Cam Johnson missing shots, Mikal Bridges missing shots, if one of them gets hurt, like Devin Booker, struggled with a hamstring injury in the first round, if anything starts to fall apart, they're frighteningly fragile, and that extends to the next part of this equation. That is the fact that DeAndre Ayton is not the kind of like safety valve offensive solution that you hoped that he would become. Certainly when you drafted him with the first overall pick, but then, as he continued to grow and develop once Chris Paul got there. I think the mindset and the idea for Phoenix in terms of when they brought in Chris Paul and they had that great run last year to the finals was that over time, some of that offensive responsibility as Paul aged would start to shift towards Ayton and start to show his value a little bit more on the offensive end of the floor as an offensive creator. He was never going to be like, he's not going to be Joel Embiid, right? But you can take fractions of what Paul does, put some of that responsibility on Ayton and save, Chris Paul for really, really important moments. But I don't know if Phoenix knew this before the year and that's why they were hesitant to give him the extension, or it's just a financial thing, or the fact that he's a center. But whatever we thought DeAndre Ayton could turn into as a perennial all-star, he has not turned into that. And in the postseason, it got weird, especially in Game 7. He played less than 20 minutes in Game 7. And that is, in my opinion, the most obvious thing to at least try and take a look at. I'm not advocating for you to move DeAndre Ayton. I'm not saying that, things are necessarily over, but you're in a very dangerous position here if you don't do anything to end up right back in the same spot next season. So specifically for the Ayton situation, he's a restricted free agent this offseason. And in an offseason in which a handful of teams have cap space and none of the teams are really ones that you are all that excited about going to if you're a potential free agent, the threat of DeAndre Ayton leaving Phoenix, if Phoenix wants to keep him and pay him, is really not all that high. And so it comes down to their willingness to move the former first overall pick, the guy they picked ahead of Luka, who just destroyed them in a playoff series, by the way. And if they were to move him, what would they look to get in exchange? I've seen a lot of people on the Grizzlies video earlier this week talking about a Jaren Jackson Jr. exchange. I think there's a lot of teams that would like to have DeAndre Ayton, assuming he's not making $35 million a year. Teams like Atlanta, teams like Charlotte, come to mind here. But from a sign and trade perspective, things get really complicated really quickly structurally when you're trying to make that kind of move. So basically, what it comes down to is this is the situation Phoenix has put themselves in. By not signing Ayton to an extension prior to the season, that might have trickled in a little bit to some of his weird performances down the end of the year. And now you're in a situation where it's either lose him for nothing and not sign him to the offer sheet, or you have to sign and trade him rather than already having that extension agreed to prior to the year. Then it gets easier to trade Ayton in this offseason. And so ultimately, I think that they're going to explore the Ayton thing. They might explore a Chris Paul thing. And then the thing that kind of hovers over all this is like, how willing is ownership going to be to paying all these guys collectively? Like, is it not going to be a basketball decision? Is it not going to be like, hey, we don't have good trade offers for DeAndre Ayton and for Chris Paul, we should just keep them because we're not making our team better? Or is it going to be hey, we got to move one of these guys because I'm not trying to pay into the luxury tax for a team that just lost by 40 in the second round, Game 7? All that stuff comes into play here. And it's just such a weird situation because this is a team that a week ago we felt really strongly about. Like, they made the finals. They were up 2-0 in the Dallas series. They look like the best team in the West. They look like they had a relatively clear path to a repeat performance in the finals, assuming that Golden State didn't do anything crazy. And within the span of a week, everything's fallen apart. And now I'm standing here questioning, like, are they even going to be contenders moving forward? Like, Chris Paul could just get hurt all next year if Ayton doesn't develop and Booker is still not like a Luka level guy, which it doesn't seem like he's going to, and they don't have other perimeter creators. They might just be screwed. Like, the window might be over. And I kind of think that's where I've landed, even with taking a few days to really process this, really understand kind of what moves are on the table for them. I think it's over. Like, I actually legitimately think that the window has closed for Phoenix as a championship team. They had their opportunity last year when they got to the finals, and they had a real opportunity to get back to the finals this year, and they screwed it up. They let that series get to 7 games. They lost Game 7 in one of the worst performances ever. And now that's the situation they're in. The only counter to that is like, plan A is still really good. And if plan A works next year and everybody's healthy, they can still be a finals team. Other than that, I mean, you're looking at moving Cam Johnson, you're looking at moving Mikal Bridges, who's one of the better wing defenders in the league, you're looking at moving Chris Paul, you're looking at moving DeAndre Ayton. None of those options are very realistic. Now, the only other thing you could do is try and get some kind of perimeter creator on this roster without giving up any of the main significant assets. So like, you have some salaries you can use if you want to like attach 2 future first round picks and go out and get it's maybe 2 future first round picks is too extreme, but like, go out and get someone like Jordan Clarkson, right? Like, someone that's going to go out there and it's like, okay, Chris Paul doesn't have it. We need someone that can go out there and score for us so it doesn't have to be just Devin Booker. Finding someone like that, I think, would help alleviate and minimize some of their flaws. But is that really what we're talking about here? Like, if you're at a point where you need to go out and get Jordan Clarkson to try and improve your ability to be a championship team, you're probably not a championship team. And I think what it comes down to for Phoenix is they had a 2-year window with Chris Paul, and he's probably going to be great in the regular season again next year, but he's a late 30s, 6-foot guard. Like, it has a history of failures in the playoffs, and he has to be really good for you to get to the finals. And if that's not going to happen, you're not a finals team. I don't care how good Devin Booker is. He's not Luka. He's not Giannis. And if DeAndre Ayton's not going to continue to improve and you can't get value for him, then the window is closed. Now, having said that, we're going to have a ton of fun this summer looking at possible DeAndre Ayton sign-in trades, maybe some Chris Paul trades in there. Maybe you try and send one of the wings away, whether it be Jay Crowder or Cam Johnson, whatever the case may be. They're going to explore. They're going to look into some options, assuming ownership doesn't just say, hey, we can't do this anymore. Like, I think there's like a 5% possibility that ownership just says, I'm not paying the luxury tax for this team. You trade Ayton, trade Paul, build around Devin Booker. Let's get leaner. Let's get smarter. Let's not pay $160 million for a team that's not going to make it out of the second round of the playoffs. There's like a 5% chance of that. Outside of that happening, I think they're done.